Hi, welcome back. Here we are at another session of our Fall 2018 study, the Gospel Project for Students. So we start in Unit 2 this time. And so we wrapped up Unit 1. Unit 1, we were kind of looking at God's good creation, us being created in God's image, the Noah, the flood event. And so here we are. We're going to kind of, we took a detour. We ended up Unit 1 in the book of Job, but we're going to go back to the story of Genesis now. And so here we are kind of picking it up. We're going to be in Genesis 12. God makes a promise, and that's the title for today's session. So Unit 2, Session 1 is where we are at. The title for Unit 2 is God Establishes a Covenant People. And so now think back, before we went to Job, we ended up with the Tower of Babel. So we were at Genesis chapter 11, and we were looking at sort of this continual desire in the hearts of man. To not only reject God's commission in our lives, God gave them explicit instructions to go and sort of and multiply and bear my image, right? And so instead they sort of come together, they congregate together. Instead of reflecting God, they're trying to make a name for themselves. They're trying to make their name great instead of God's name. And so we see this continual rejection in the heart of man towards God, but we also see this continual grace on the part of God towards man. And that's what we see here. We see that in the calling of Abraham. And so here's what I would want you to do. There's some great points of application to talk with the students about this. You definitely can talk about the fact of Abraham, sort of just having this initial faith to believe in God, to kind of leave the comforts and the familiarity of his home and his surroundings to go to a place he didn't necessarily know. And so you can even draw out some maps and show how, man, this was like not just a kind of an adventure in the neighborhood. He wasn't just kind of moving from one cul-de-sac to another, but this was a pretty big move on his part. And so you can go there, and that's totally well worth your time and permissible, but I would also spend some time, guys, just highlighting and emphasizing in the minds of your students God's grace. God didn't have to call anyone, right? God could have, again, just kind of done away with the people of Babel. He didn't have to sort of spread them out and confuse their languages, but here he did, and he had it in mind that he was going to call someone to bless them as a family, but so that they would be a blessing to other families, that they were going to be this sort of conduit in which all the families of the world would be blessed because the Messiah would come through their line. And so, man, it just emphasizes and highlights God's grace and mercy. I get really frustrated when I hear people say, man, the God of the Old Testament, man, he was an angry and judgmental God. But the God of the New Testament, Jesus, I mean, that's super gracious, super merciful, and they talk about it as if they're different gods, but that's totally untrue. Those people haven't read their Old Testament. Here we see over and over again the wickedness in the hearts of man, and men and women, and then we see just God's continual graciousness over and over and over again. So please don't miss that point and emphasize that to your students, because maybe they're working with that misconception as well, and they need to be corrected. So emphasize God, emphasize His goodness and His grace and His mercy in this session, in addition to some of these other interesting talking points that we have regarding Abraham and his call. So, well, that's all the time that we have. We'll see you here next time for Unit 2, Session 2. Thanks for being with us.